you're welcome to. This has been a good, effective service. I appreciate John putting this together. When I saw the lineup of the different prayers and songs, there was one passage that jumped out to me that I hope can tie some of these things together that we've been praying and singing through. Can you and will you turn your Bible to John chapter 13? John chapter 13. This morning I spoke about service in the sermon, and there are so many other passages to go to talk about a great subject like that. And John 13 is certainly one of those. And as we come to this chapter in the Gospel of John, I want to remind everyone where we are at in the life of Jesus. We're at the very end. I know it's sometimes hard to remember that because you would think the middle of the Gospel of John, surely that's somewhere in the middle of Jesus' ministry. But this is actually Jesus' last conversation that he is going to have with his disciples before he is taken to be crucified on the cross. And I want us to put ourselves in the shoes of Jesus because this whole story, we'll learn in verses 16 and 17, and verse 15 particularly, that this is an example for us. But I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Jesus and ask yourself, what would you be doing if you knew your death was imminent? What would you be doing if you knew in just a few days, in just a few moments, your life would be taken from you? Perhaps what the world does in those moments, they think, well, I'm going to get served in those moments. I'm going to go out and I'm going to live up all these life experiences and gain all that I can because I know that my days are numbered. What was Jesus doing when he knew that his days were limited? Read with me John 13 and verse 1. Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now, when it was time for supper, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. And Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. So he got up from supper, laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel and tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who asked him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I'm doing you don't realize now, but afterward you will understand." "You will never wash my feet," Peter said. Jesus replied, "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." One who is bathed, Jesus told him, doesn't need to wash anything except his feet, but he is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. This is why he said, not all of you are clean. When Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done for you. Truly I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." 4 things I want to learn about service, and then I will turn the lesson over to Matt for an invitation song. Number 1, service, the way Jesus serves, does not think about the job. Service, the way that Jesus serves, does not think about the job. It just thinks about what needs to be done. I think too many times whenever it comes to serving our brethren or serving other people, we are too caught up in thinking, am I belittling myself or am I stooping too low to do a job like this? How many of these men did you see going for the towel to wash each other's feet? Jesus saw what needed to be done, and Jesus stepped in to wash his disciples' feet. It didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter how dirty it was. Do you remember in Nehemiah chapter 3, one of the most overlooked chapters in Nehemiah, it goes through and it lists off the different people who were participating and helping in the work of rebuilding the wall. In Nehemiah 3 and verse 13, it tells us about a family who worked at the refuse gate. Maybe your translation says the dung gate. How many people do you think were chomping at the bit to go and work down there at that part of the gate or at that part of the wall? Not very many, but it needed to be done. And so that family said, I'll go do that. Perhaps there are tasks and jobs and ways to serve within this local congregation that not everyone wants to jump in and do. Stop thinking about what the job is, realize it needs to be done, and get in there and do something about it. Service doesn't think about the job. And if these disciples, not in the Gospel of John, but in the other three Gospels, it mentions that at one point, these guys were fighting about who were greatest. And I think too often we spend too much time fighting about who's greatest and not enough time fighting for the towel to serve each other. That's what the disciples should have been doing. They were thinking about the job. They were thinking about their position. Stop thinking about that. Serve your brethren. Number two, Jesus teaches us that service is unbiased. Jesus elaborates a little bit, and it's still shocking to me, but you have to understand how much these disciples loved each other. But Jesus mentions in verse 11 that there is somebody that is not clean there. At the end of verse 10, you are clean, but not all of you. Jesus washed the feet of Judas, knowing that only a few moments later, Judas would betray him. And yet Jesus still washed his feet. Would we still be willing to wash Judas's feet if we knew that he would betray us? Number three, receiving service can be difficult. Did you notice Peter's reaction in verse 6 whenever Jesus finally gets around to him? Lord, you're going to wash my feet? Jesus, this is beneath you. You should not be willing to do this. This is not right. Of course, once Simon Peter recognizes I think, spiritual significance of this washing from Jesus, he says, well, then not only my feet, but my hands and my head. But I think what we learn in this is a natural trait for a lot of us, that we don't want someone's help. I don't want you to serve me like that. You leave me alone. Do we see that in the Lord's church sometimes? Do we see somebody that is in desperate need of attention, albeit whether it be physical or spiritual, and yet they are too proud to take the help that they need? Similarly, this morning, we were making the point, what would it look like if the entire church was saying, somebody needs to do this, somebody needs to jump in there? Well, how would it look if it was a church full of people who just said, oh, I don't need help? Well, then nobody's getting the help that they need. We have got to be willing to say when we need help. We've got to humble ourselves and say, it's time for me to get help. Number four, and lastly, and probably the most important here, service is expected by Jesus. Maybe a stronger word. Service is commanded by Jesus. It is not an optional characteristic of his disciples. Because no sooner than Jesus gets done doing this, I wonder if the disciples sensed that a question would be coming. He asked them, do you know what I have done for you? In verse 12. You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right. But if I am the Lord and the teacher, and I have washed your feet, how much more so should you be washing one another's feet? Jesus says in verse 15 that he gave this as an example. So you should do just as I have done for you. This is no suggestion. Service is a commandment. And in verse 17, Jesus says, if you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Everyone in here who's heard this invitation tonight, you heard it, you know it. So the only thing left to do is to go do it. Who will you and I serve this week? What brother or sister in this local flock need your attention? What brother or sister need you to go and reach out to them and pray for them and to help them and to do what they need you to do so that they know that you're there for them? Make a list. Who are you going to reach out to this week? Thank you all for your attention. This is now a good opportunity for anyone who needs prayers of this congregation, or perhaps you want to know more about what it means to become a Christian. If we can help you in any way, won't you come now as we stand and as we sing?